So welcome again to everybody. So just, I suppose, just a reminder that we will have the Q&A session throughout today's programme. But really, I suppose, an introduction to Julie's Bicycle Europe. We've been working with the Arts Council over the past number of years in creating and implementing their climate action policy and implementation plan. And the Julie's Bicycle Europe partnership is made up of Native Events, Julie's Bicycle and the Green Arts Initiative. So for myself, my name is Noreen Lucy and I work with Native Events. I work as a sustainability consultancy, and I suppose my own background is in education and working with universities globally in helping them implement sustainability strategies. But I joined Native Events several years ago because I believed that the role of the arts and culture sector and the power of cultural events really as a catalyst for social change. So within Native Events, we offer consultancy. So we work with organisations in creating sustainability strategies and roadmaps. We work on auditing and reporting on emissions. And then, as we're doing today, we provide training and workshops. We have a production side of the house, and that works on projects such as event management and smart power and energy monitoring. And then we also provide eco-event hire solutions, I suppose providing reusable cups, solar generators and solar sound systems. So that's a little bit about us.
And then the Green Arts Initiative in Ireland, Katrina Fallon is my name, and I think Niamh is in the audience today, so Niamh will hopefully recognise this photograph. The Green Arts Initiative was set up through Theatre Forum back in 2018, and since then we've done a bit of work around, really a lot of us have been around research and providing training and support to arts organisations, particularly in the performing arts sector. My background was originally in venue management and visual arts, so hopefully I'm bringing some of that expertise and understanding at least to a lot of you, because having experience of having worked in the sector, I would understand some of the challenges and the obstacles that you face. Two projects we ran, the Greening Venues pilot project and the Greening Art Centres project, and more recently the Greener Touring project. But this is a photograph from outside Axis in Ballymun as part of the Greening Art Centres project. And we're mentored by Creative Carbon Scotland.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us online today. So I'm Elaine Doyle. I was probably the one to first reach out to you about our climate engagement programme. So you might recognise the name, but not necessarily the face. So just a very, very brief about me. I worked previously in a small environmental and geolocation tech consultancy. And I worked primarily with the agriculture sector, but also did some work with cultural and heritage bodies, providing environmental assessments and policy advice. So I've always been interested on that policy side of things, which led me then to the Arts Council, which I joined last year. And I'm a programme delivery manager for them, looking after both climate action and digital arts.
Thanks, Elaine.
And I suppose to recap in terms of who is Julie's Bicycle EU, well, that is a partnership entity between Julie's Bicycle and Native Events and working with the Green Arts Initiative.
So we're just going to talk a little bit about why we're here, but just if you've joined us recently, just a couple of things. If you could put yourself on mute, that would be great. And do feel free, you can turn off your screens for the moment because it's more energy efficient, and we'll hopefully have a bit of engagement later on where we'd ask you to turn your screens on. If you have questions and just you missed that bit at the very beginning, we're asking people, because it's a sizable enough group, we're asking people to put questions into the chat, and we'll manage those, and we'll also stay on for half an hour between 12 and half 12 for anybody who wants to have a longer discussion. So just that question, why are we here? Well, first reason is really because it's a climate emergency. And when we initially were doing this session in public, I didn't actually have a slide, an image for this, but I decided it needed something just to kind of visually present the idea of the climate emergency and maybe how it intersects with the cultural sector. So this is an image many of you will probably recognise from Galway, capital of the City of Culture, back in 2020, which was a very challenging year for them. But on this particular occasion, they were going to launch the Year of Culture in February out of doors, which was probably a little bit optimistic. But so it shows the way that I think we tend to think in Ireland as climate change being a series of unfortunate weather events. And this was one of those. Obviously, we're going to talk about how it's a lot more than that. But so obviously the event was cancelled. And when I used this picture, I thought it was interesting that it had that sign, path ahead closed, please use alternative route, which is kind of a metaphor really for where we are, and that we need to find an alternative route if we're going to deal effectively with climate change, and that sort of danger sign, danger ahead. So we're here because it's the climate emergency. And then Noreen's going to talk a little bit about.
Yeah, and I suppose, you know, we're here as well because of the work that the Arts Council has been doing on the climate and environmental policy and action plan. And of course, you know, the ask of organisations and of you today. So we'll be explaining that and going through that in detail and giving you very clear and concise information of what is expected of you this year for the funding of 2025. So I suppose, you know, understanding your role and what is expected of you in terms of those requirements, and then our role in terms of the support, help and resources that we have put together for you as organisations, appreciating that the scale and ambition will differ between you all, and then, you know, looking for your feedback in terms of, have we thought of everything, or is there anything in addition that you would like to see from us?
So
and of course,
yeah, so I suppose this is in addition to all the in-person sessions, we ran about 10 of those around the country, and they work very well. And I suppose at least it's kind of prepared us a little bit for doing the online version. And what we've said at each of those is just maybe to bear with us, because it's obviously it's a topic that's kind of overwhelming for many people, but also 2 hours, we're very conscious that 2 hours online is a lot. And some of it is maybe a little bit dry. So please bear with us, and we'll try and make it as engaging as we possibly can. So just in terms of how today's structure is lined out, Noreen is going to cover the discovery phase that we did at the very beginning of this whole project, where we consulted with a lot of people in the sector. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about setting the scene in terms of nationally, looking at the climate action plan and the state policy. Then Elaine is going to talk to us about the Arts Council's own policy. And then we're going to use Mentimeter to get your input. We'll have a 5-minute break, and then Noreen is going to go through an overview of the training and supports. We have some case studies, which we're very grateful for, one from Galway International Arts Festival and one from West Cork Music. And then finally, there'll be a little bit of practical advice towards the very end. So the discovery phase.
Thank you, Katrina. So as Katrina mentioned, I suppose the discovery phase was really us connecting with the arts and culture sector to understand and I suppose to hear, you know, what training and supports would be needed to help us design a training and support programme to help strategically funded organisations and arts centres to, you know, I suppose create a training and support programme to meet the Arts Council's requirements. So we spoke to 30 organisations in total from across various art forms, with a broad geographical spread across the country. And you can see here, you know, they included resource organisations, venues, festivals, galleries, production companies and studios. And it was really to give us a good snapshot and hopefully, you know, to hear from the sector in terms of what supports were needed. We asked organisations how they felt about the funding requirements, and some of the common concerns that came back to us was that this would be an additional administrative burden, that organisations were being asked to do more, but without additional funding, that the operational costs of taking climate action, you know, they were highlighted in terms of this is, you know, this is going to be a challenge, I suppose. And then a main concern was that to take real action, access to capital funding would be needed by many organisations, especially larger buildings. But organisations also felt that it was crucial that clear and concise guidance was given as to what was expected. We spoke to organisations about the key environmental impacts and issues relevant to them, and impacts, you know, they're often specific to the type of activities of an organisation, such as, you know, building-based organisations. Their impact areas will be energy, water, procurement, for example. Production organisations, you know, they'll be looking at impact areas such as travel and transport, accommodation and materials. Then for festivals, it's a different impact area, you know, they'll be really looking at transport, audience travel, materials and waste also. And with resource organisations, again, you know, looking at travel, events, procurement. And then across the board, I suppose what we heard from all organisations were some common key areas of concern, such as publications, printing and digital sustainability. So that was just, I suppose, some of the key top line pieces. And then in terms of the training and support needs that we heard that were, I suppose, commonly fed back to us, it was the need for practical resources in terms of, well, what does action look like and what action can we take? The peer-to-peer knowledge, you know, learning from each other and sharing best practice, clear guidance on what policies and plans should look like. You know, we heard that from the sector so many times. And then organisations asked that training and support should be tailored to the different types of activities of each organisation.
Okay, so we're on to the context, and thanks a million for that, Noreen. We're on to the context and policy overview part of it. This is the only kind of science slide we have, but just for anybody who doesn't know, and I'm sure most of you do, just in terms of what is global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it. Essentially, as you know, the Earth is unique in that it has an atmosphere that makes life on Earth viable. It keeps the temperature on Earth at a viable level for both humans and all the other things that live on the planet. And basically how that happens is the atmosphere stores energy from the sun. So as the energy from the sun warms the Earth, some of it is held within the atmosphere, some of it escapes back into space. But as greenhouse gases build up in the atmosphere, they're storing more and more of that energy within our atmosphere. And of course, we know that those greenhouse gases are coming from the burning of fossil fuels, for example, but also from methane and other gases like nitrous oxide. So therein lies our problem. And obviously, we know incontrovertibly that human activity is the main cause for those gases building up in the environment. So where is Ireland in terms of emissions? Well, if you look back over maybe just a little over 30, 34 years, back to 1990, this is just a rough idea of how our emissions have risen and fallen. And you'd probably work out that, you know, in 2001 was kind of at the height of the Celtic Tiger, 2011 was the crash, 2017 was the recovery, 2020 was the pandemic. So basically, as our levels of activity rise and fall, so do our emissions. They dropped slightly in 2022 in comparison with 2021, but we're still a little bit higher than we would have been in 1990. Now we have a much bigger population, and there is increasing evidence that the growth in emissions is becoming coupled a little bit from activity, but that still doesn't leave us in a very good place. So the total emissions, the most recent emissions we have, the figures we have are for 2022. The 2023 figures should come out sometime next month. So the total emissions for 2022 were 60.76 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, there may be people amongst you who know a lot about emissions, but for most of us, that doesn't really mean an awful lot. But maybe if we look at it per capita, so it works out at about just under 12 tonnes of carbon dioxide per capita. And when we were doing this in person, we would ask people, you know, how do they think we compared with other countries around the world, and indeed with other countries in Europe. And I'm guessing a lot of you will know that we are certainly, we're one of the worst in Europe, either the worst or the second worst. So for all that we would often say we're a small country, our emissions don't really matter because we've got a small population. In fact, our emissions are equivalent to that of a country with a population 5 to 10 times the size of ours. So our emissions do matter. And I suppose they matter particularly for people living in other parts of the world where they are much more subject to the consequences of climate change. And this was after a very major storm in Mozambique. And these unfortunate people are burying some of their relatives that were killed. So it's not just about us, which is very important to remember. But in terms of us and our emissions, if we just look, this is a kind of a snapshot of 4 different areas where we have emissions. And again, it's for 2022, figures for 23 yet to come out. And it shows you that there has been a drop in the carbon footprint of our energy industries. That's largely down to the decarbonisation of our electricity grid. So that is a kind of good news story that we can all take some heart from, that we are really doing a lot of good work, including renewables. When you hear talk of decarbonising our electricity grid, what's meant by that is that there's an increasing amount of renewable energy on our electricity grid. agriculture, often the whipping boy for many, but that emissions from agriculture have decreased. Residential emissions decreased. And again, I would have asked people, why do they think particularly in 2022, there are obviously things like, good house building, the zero regs, the regulations have really improved, but really a lot of that was down to the energy crisis caused by the war in Ukraine. Transport is the one that we always seem to struggle with, and emissions in transport went up in 2022, and I think they're predicted to possibly go up again for 2023. And that's down to a lot of historical reasons, just the way Ireland, the way we've built over years, and the way the kind of dispersed population and limited public transport. So what are the activities that create greenhouse gas emissions? Very simply, it's how we power and how we power our industries and our homes, our businesses, how we use travel and transport, how we transport our goods, how we travel around the country. And finally, it's how we use land. That's both agriculture and forestry. So I'm now going to ask you, if you would, to go to the Mentimeter. So if you go to menti.com, so www.menti.com, and you should be prompted to put in a code, 63977035. So menti.com, and then we're going to ask you to put in a code, 63977035. So I actually think I might have these questions in the wrong order, but we'll see. Okay, is anybody any issues? You could put it into the chat, and Brecken might let me know if there's anything. Everybody happy enough with that? Okay, so I think I have these questions in the wrong order, if I'm right, but we'll see. So, yeah, I think I've got, you might have a question about, I'm guessing you might have a question about the carbon emission targets for Ireland. But if you do, skip on to the third question. So anyway, whether you have Mentimeter or not for this is really just a bit of a quiz to make sure that everybody sort of hasn't dozed off behind your screen. So it's a rule of thumb that I think works very well for people when we're trying to understand how we use energy. Somebody took me to task about this and said that I should explain what a kilowatt hour is, kWh, kilowatt hour. So for example, if you think of your kettle, if you boiled your kettle for an hour, it would use 3 kilowatts of electricity. So bearing that in mind, what I'm really asking is how much, if you look at electricity, how much electricity would the average Irish household use in a year? How many kilowatt hours of electricity? I don't know if Noreen is on the Mentimeter or if Brecken is on if anybody can see.
We have a lot of, most of the people are saying 4,200 kilowatts.
Okay. So Brecken's able to feedback on that. That's great.
Can't talk yet.
Okay, so Brecken can let me know when we think most people have, and obviously this is entirely optional, but it's just a nice way to kind of keep our brains working. And obviously you can't cheat and look it up online because that would be counterproductive. So, and the second question then is how many kilowatts, if you were to, now we use oil and gas and in some cases electricity, but if you were to convert your oil and gas to electricity, how many kilowatts of would you use in an average year to heat your home? So the first one was how would you power your home in terms of electricity? The second question is how in terms of heating your home. Really it's to gauge, is it more or less energy that we use for heating our home as opposed to powering it? And we'll just give you a couple of minutes to answer that one. And then
We have a lot of responses coming in at 11,000 kilowatts for that.
Okay, very good. Yeah. And so far you're all right. You're right. It is 4,200 kilowatts is the average electricity used for the Irish house. And for heating, yes, it is. It's around 11,000. And the final one then is for travel. So for the average car, and I know a lot of people in the arts actually don't own cars or travel very little by car. They are great for public transport, especially those who are based in Dublin, because there's kind of good public transport links there. But if you were to do an average commute of sort of 25, 30 kilometers a day, how much, again, and you convert that to kilowatt, would it be more or less than the heat? So Brecken, you can let me know how we're getting on with that.
We have a very smart crowd here today, Katrina.
Okay.
We're saying
Well,
it's
fair play,
18,000.
because that wasn't the case around the country. So you're very, very tuned in. Yeah, so it's really just to reflect that you know, that we do use a huge amount of energy in terms of travel. And that's something that we could all maybe think a little bit about. And heating is the second, and then electricity. So where are we in terms of climate legislation? I use this slide kind of to illustrate the policy desert that really existed before the current government. So we were very a bit of a laggard, as was often said, when it came to climate policy. And then we had John Bruton brought out a climate action plan in 2019, and there was a few green shoots. And then eventually Ireland declared a climate and biodiversity emergency in 2019, and this is the Dáil on the day that happened. So you can see there was a hugely popular move, and everybody was in attendance in order to make sure that it happened. So in our own Irish way, it was Eamon Ryan who said that. From that came the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Amendment Bill. So that's, I'm not going to go into that in detail, but that bill is really why you're all here today, because that bill set a number of targets. So that's, I think, the next question in Mentimeter, if you feel like answering that now, is, you know, what does anybody know what the targets for reduction in greenhouse gases are by 2030? So that was the key part of that piece of legislation, setting targets, legally binding targets for reductions in emissions by 2030. And that was 51%. You can never remember why the 1%, but there was a reason for it. And then again, by 2050, another target was set. And the target for that was net zero. And if you're not sure what net zero means, net zero basically means that we recognize that in 2050 we will still be there still will be emissions, but that those emissions will be sequestered or stored or will have magically disappeared. There's a little bit of sort of technological wizardry going on there. There are some techniques that have been proved but are very, very expensive. But we're hoping that, you know, storage in land, in restored wetlands and forestry and so on will help to store whatever emissions are left at that stage. So if you think about what you're all going to try and do, which is to create a climate action environmental policy, this sentence really captures the state's climate action and environmental policy. Ireland's national climate objective requires the state to pursue and achieve by no later than the end of the year 2050, the transition to a climate resilient, biodiversity rich, environmentally sustainable and climate neutral economy. So that's the policy, and making that happen is the climate action plans. You'll all have heard about the different climate action plans. We've had 3 to date. Here's the first 2. One came in 2021, one is in 2023. There's a new one that has just been recently launched about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then really through every sort of strand of government, through every government agency, the sort of threads of that legislation are evident. So the local authority has its own climate action plan. You probably know that your local authorities now have climate action officers. They have biodiversity officers. Any state agency has to, including or any public body, including the Arts Council, has to follow a certain, comply with a certain roadmap. So in everything that we're doing, including the arts sector, so that filtered down to the department. The reason that the Arts Council has a climate action policy is because that obligation came down through the department, and the department themselves are finalising their it's a policy document. I can never remember the exact title, for creativity, climate and culture, creativity and climate, and that's due to be published in June of this year. And we should have said that the reason the Arts Council's own policy is not yet published is because they're waiting on that particular document from the department, and Elaine will probably talk to you a little bit more about that. So just to show how that sort of thread has come down through every strand of government, local government and so on, down to us here today. So the climate action plans are obviously very large, lengthy documents, but they also do give, you know, deadlines, who's responsible. This is a kind of a useful infographic that they produced for the last plan, and I'm sure they produce something similar. It's not that different, the current version. But these are what they call the 6 vital high impact sectors. So it kind of makes the plan a little bit easier to grasp. So they break it down to these 6 high impact areas, and I would suggest that there are 2 that are really relevant to you all here today. And one is transforming how we travel, because if we think about it, the arts sector itself has a small carbon footprint. If you look at all the other sectors in Ireland, it's tiny, but where it does have a big influence is over travel, because so many people travel to arts events, and we have great potential to do something to influence how that happens. And so the state's policy on travel is, we will drive policies to reduce transport emissions by improving our towns, cities and rural planning, and by adopting the avoid, shift, improve approach, reducing or avoiding the need for travel, shifting to public transport, walking and cycling, and improving the energy efficiency of vehicles. So part of that is not that we should necessarily all go out and buy an electric car. So the state recognises that that's not affordable for a lot of people, but also it's not necessarily, swapping every single car we have for an electric car is not necessarily the solution. So it's that avoid, shift, improve that they focus on. And then when it comes to greening business and enterprise, every arts organisation is a small business and has the same constraints and challenges that every small business faces in Ireland. So in terms of the ambition there, that is that we're changing how we produce, consume, and design our goods and services. And by breaking the link between fossil fuels and economic progress, decarbonising industry and enterprise is key to Ireland's economy and future competitiveness. Very, very ambitious, I would argue, but yeah, that's where we're hoping to go. And just finally, to mention, this is the, parallel to that climate emergency is a biodiversity emergency. And whilst it is affected to a great extent by climate change, it's also affected by a lot of other things like pollution, reduced habitats, and all of those things, how we travel and so on. So a lot of arts organisations would deal a lot with biodiversity. It's a very common, very popular theme with artists, particularly visual artists. So I just think it's very important to bear that in mind in your own policy. So I think that's probably me done. Thank you very much. And now we're going to move on to Elaine. So I'm going to move the slides for Elaine. Hopefully, like I said,
Thanks, Katrina.
In the background. Hopefully, I'll manage that well. So over to you, Elaine.
Brilliant. Thanks, Katrina. So yeah, I'm going to quickly go through the Arts Council's forthcoming climate action and environmental policy, and also go over kind of the ask for strategic and arts centre funding. So the reason that the Arts Council have created this policy has been partially a trickle down from government climate policies, as Katrina mentioned a few minutes ago. And I suppose the public sector climate action strategy being one very relevant to the Arts Council in terms of our role and responsibility as a public body. But the creation of our policy has also been a response to the sector because it became more and more clear that there were quite a large number who were already committed and concerned about climate and really wanted the Arts Council to do more in terms of support. So there was quite an extensive consultation phase carried out by the Arts Council and supported by Julie's Bicycle EU. So this included a large sector survey, internal and external interviews and steering groups, and just wanted to share, I suppose, a few of the highlights from that today. So that included that 91% agreed that the arts community has a unique and crucial role to play in meeting this moment of climate and environmental crisis through its own actions and through its ability to engage with people, inform and mobilise change. And then another interesting statistic, that's 74% believe that action can bring opportunities from new creative and engagement opportunities to improved health and well-being. And then we found that most organisations are in the early stages of responding to the climate crisis. So either at the very early stages or making progress. But I suppose worth noting as well, there's a considerate chunk who are well on the way, which is excellent really to see as well. And I suppose that's why, we are seeing this as more of an engagement programme with the sector, because we know ourselves that there's a lot that can be learned from the sector. So our policy was approved by Council last year in 2023, and we will be launching in 2024 under the department's new National Framework on Culture, Creativity and Climate. So again, as Katrina mentioned, we believe that the plan currently for this is to launch in summer, and then we will hopefully launch soon after this, because our policy will act as one of the pillars of this framework. And then our policy will cover both our corporate actions and our role vis-a-vis the sector. So unfortunately, I can't share our policy with you all today. That might be a relief for some people, but I suppose just to give a sense of the outcomes that we will work to achieve over the next 3 years. So firstly, the Arts Council will be leading by example, that we practice what we preach. Probably most vitally for yourselves, that the arts will have the skills, resources and support to take action. And hopefully that kind of begins today, our support of that. And that the arts are empowered to lead change. That the Arts Council funding will drive and enable action. And probably most importantly for ourselves is that the Arts Council works with others to unlock further funding opportunities, and also that the Arts Council is advocating for the role of the arts in positive change. So we've started this by engaging with other public bodies such as the SEAI, because we know that we won't be able to solve all the issues, whether that be, you know, our transport networks or decarbonising buildings ourselves. We are going to have to work in partnership with other bodies. So yeah, as a public body, the Arts Council is required to create a climate action roadmap, which focuses mostly on our corporate actions and organisational actions that we're taking or plan to take to reduce our emissions in line with our targets. So we submit this annually to the SEAI, and our required actions from this, I suppose, do align with our corporate actions and our policy, but the roadmap doesn't cover our actions for the sector. But our 2023 roadmap is available publicly online, and we'll be updating this shortly for 2024. But some of the kind of more corporate actions that we've taken internally in line with our roadmap include electing a climate and sustainability champion on SMT. I was also put in place over the Climate Action Environmental Programme alongside Digital Arts last year. We've named an energy performance officer. We've established a green team internally, and we've 14 members of staff on this who come from different art forms and departments, which is great. And we've also conducted a staff climate action survey and established our carbon footprint for 2023. And then finally, we're also working with Julie's Bicycle EU at the moment on a training and awareness programme for our staff as well, at different levels. So would that be SMT, our green team, arts managers and all staff. And yeah, I suppose just to quickly highlight that we do have a climate action section on our website. So it includes an overview of our consultation process, a more detailed view than I gave here today. It includes some links to tools to measure impact, a list of available government funding currently and training resources. But we will be updating this section throughout the year and using it more regularly. So we'll be uploading any templates, guides, and recordings of this session or future sessions here also. So in terms of the ask for organisations this year, as you'll know, our strategic funding guidelines last year outlined that organisations awarded funding in 2024 will be required to develop environmental commitment and reporting during 2024. Having an organisational climate policy that demonstrates environmental commitment and reporting will become a condition of funding in 2025. And to support organisations in the process, we will offer training and other resources in 2024. So I suppose what does that look like in practice? So strategically funded organisations and art centres will need to provide a document or a set of documents when drawing down on funding in January 2025. So you do not need to have your policies and plans complete in September for application. I think this is a question that's come up quite regularly as we did our regional roadshow. The policy will be light touch. We're not asking for reams and reams of pages, but rather a kind of simple statement of top line environmental ambition, commitment, goals, values, principles, and again, which is specific to the size and scale and nature of your organisation. Because look, we do understand that, you know, smaller organisations may not have as large of a policy as those who would be much larger. And then also that just that in your policy that it makes clear who's accountable and responsible overall. And And this will then provide a framework for environmental action reporting for each organisation then. So alongside then this top line statement of policy, we're also looking for a plan of action of how your organisation will achieve your ambition, commitments and goals, or how you put your environmental values or principles into practice. So the plan will likely include actions to reduce impacts and green place practice or production, actions to inform, inspire or support change, and environmental communications and engagement. And our future webinars, which Noreen will be going through later, and the templates and guides that will come out from that will help form this for you. So what happens then? So Julie's Bicycle EU will work with the Arts Council throughout 2024 to develop a monitoring approach for 2025. So this will be light touch and hopefully relatively easy for you. It will likely take the format of a survey of some sort, and we can use the information and we hope anyways to use the information to share and celebrate progress and good practice. This is probably an important slide. It's a question again that came up time and time again, but there are currently no plans to ask organisations to submit their environmental data or carbon footprint in 2025. We can't guarantee that this won't be sought in the future, but that will be dependent on a number of factors, including, the forthcoming framework, future sitting governments, international and national policies. But if we are to seek that at some stage in the future, it will be for a reason, but there's currently no plans. So we drafted up a few kind of frequently asked questions that came up over the regional roadshow. I've probably answered one or two of them, but I might just go through them anyways. So apologies if there's a bit of repetition. So one of the questions that came up quite regularly was, if we have a climate and environmental policy, do we have to create a new one? So no, absolutely not. You may like to edit or tailor it if you attend some of our webinars and maybe feel a bit inspired on some of the topics. But we know that time is an issue for most organisations. So we don't want to put any additional strain where possible. So if you already have one, that's absolutely perfect. Will we have to provide any additional information on our climate change and environmental commitments in our annual application form in September? So again, no, your climate policy will not be assessed in September. The largest ask would be an understanding that if you're awarded funding, that you will need to submit your policy and plan on drawdown of funding in January. How long should our policy and action plan be? It's really, not a one-size-fits-all approach. Larger organisations who have, bigger impacts will probably have a more extensive action plan. And in smaller organisations, it will be kind of reflect their size as well, their policies and action plans. But we again, we're not expecting reams and reams of paper. We do want to keep this as a light touch as possible. Will there be templates for creating the policy? Yes, we will have guides and templates on specific relevant topics, which again, we'll go through a little bit in the second part of this morning. What kind of additional training will be available? So again, we'll go through this a bit more later, but we'll be offering further webinars to help you form your policy with further specific sessions then on different relevant topics. And we're also hoping to have a few kind of group sessions as well following that. And how will the Arts Council monitor our work on our policy and action plan? So I kind of touched on this a few minutes ago, but we're currently working on this and we'll give a much clearer picture to everyone in the coming weeks as we finalise. But it will likely be a survey of some sort, so it won't be overly strenuous in 2025. So that's, I suppose, just some of the questions that come up time and time again, but I'm sure there might be more as well. So I don't know how we're doing for time, but if there are any questions.
Okay, and
Yeah.
what we might, if there are some questions in the chat that are relevant to Elaine, Brecken, I know you're keeping an eye on that.
Yeah.
Do you want to just know?
Nothing has come through the chat so far.
Okay, perfect. Well, if people do have any questions, if they want to pop them in, we can either come back to you individually, or if you're able to hang on for the half hour at the end, we can address them then, if that works. Or if anyone has a question now, you can raise your hand now either.
No, but we will keep an eye on the chat. And yes, we will send out the presentation afterwards. There is a question from Ava Scanlon. So thank you, Ava. Just a comment in terms of it all looks excellent. Thank you, Elaine. And the question is, can we assign staff core costs to sustainability efforts given the additional time required to develop, manage, etc.?
That's something that I'll come back to you properly on, Ava. It's something that's being discussed internally at the moment. But I'll come back to you properly on that. And once we have the answer to that, we'll share it with everyone, of course.
Thank you, Ava. So Mary Conlon, thank you for the informative presentation. What budget did the Arts Council allocate to developing their own climate action policy?
Again, that's something I'll actually have to check. I wasn't here in 2022 when it was developed. Katrina, I don't know if you would have had sight on that.
We're just part of that, and I think it's a as far as I can remember, there was a three-year budget for a 3-year plan. So, and we're only part of sections of it. So, but I'm sure we can find out.
Yeah, we can find that out very easily.
We can find that out. Yeah.
Thank you, Mary. So no further questions at the moment, but we'll keep an eye on the chat. And as Elaine said, we can come back to any questions, and we will have that 30 minutes at the end of the session as well, if anyone wants to stay on and ask additional questions. But we're very conscious of getting you out at 12 o'clock. So I will, I suppose, move on to the next piece, which is, I suppose, more interaction. And when we're doing the in-person sessions, we would be doing this in the room and getting people to interact and move around. So I hope we've done the best that we can in terms of, I suppose, transferring that in-person interaction to online, but we will be using Mentimeter again. And we're going to ask you a few questions. And this is called, I suppose, a temperature exercise, just to gauge, I suppose, your views and your inputs, and just to kind of, I suppose, think about your own actions and where you, I suppose, believe climate action is best taken. But I suppose
so
to start off
with,
and
present maybe, yeah, you've shared your screen, reckon, which is great, and just click and present, and that'll, yeah, brilliant.
Perfect. So hopefully everyone can see that, and we're going to be using Mentimeter again. So again, the code is 63977035. And if anyone is having problems with that, you know, feel free to put it in the chat, and we can have a look at what.
Should just follow on naturally from the, if you were logged in already, that this is just the next question.
Yes, yeah. And for anyone that has joined since. But I suppose just to get you thinking, do you agree with the following statement? Policy is more powerful at addressing climate change than civic action. So I suppose when we were doing this in person, we get people to stand on one side of the room if they thought that policy and that top-down approach was more powerful than civic action and the bottom up. So it was quite interesting as people would walk around the room, kind of gauging where they felt. And of course, then, you know, a lot of people went to the middle. So I suppose here we have an example of that. You need both is clearly winning in terms of what people feel. But, you know, we have a few for policy is a critical motivator, and then all policy begins with civic action. I suppose in terms of, you know, I suppose if anyone wants to jump in, if they have any strong views on that, sometimes you'd have, you know, people who really believed it was policy and people who really believed it was civic action. So of course, feel free as well during the questions if you want to come off mute and express any, I suppose, strong thoughts you might have on this, or any insights or inputs as well.
Yeah, it'd be nice if or it says, great to reflect on the number of people required to address this issue effectively in the arts.
That's great, Orla. Yeah, and I mean, you can pop it into the chat as well. We'll keep an eye on the chat. But I think, yeah, no, it's you need both. And, you know, I think in one session we had somebody comment on how both drive the other, so you have civic action driving policy, and then it's a circular thing really in terms of policy, sometimes driving civic action. So I suppose it is.
And then there were also a lot of people, well, maybe not a lot, there were people who felt that everything begins with civic action and the policy comes out of civic action. But if anybody has a comment who feels, they'd like to share something on that, just put your hand up. And
Lucy,
okay, so Lucy feels
yeah.
very strongly that nothing actually gets done until it gets enshrined in policy. Yeah, very good, Lucy. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. That was certainly a view that came strongly, that we need that little bit of, we'll call it a little bit of a stick to motivate us.
Yeah.
So it's worth saying too that one of the positives about for individual or for organisations across the arts sector to have a policy in the long run means that there will be a bit more consistency. So if you're a touring company and you're touring to a venue, there'll be a little bit more alignment between you as a production company that's trying to do things in a tour in a green way and the venue that you're touring to. So that is maybe one of the positives to see about having environmental policies across the big swathe of the arts. Yeah, I think we might move on to the next one, maybe,
yeah.
Brecken. Yeah.
Thank you, Brecken. So the next question, do you agree the most meaningful thing the arts sector can do is publicly engage? So I suppose this is, if you feel very strongly that public engagement is critical, or as you move towards the right, public engagement is important, you need public engagement and reduced impact, or reducing impacts is important, or if you feel, no, it's not about public engagement, we have to really, really focus on reducing impacts, and that is most critical, you'll be over to the right. But I think public engagement is winning this one.
And it's probably worth saying that, that public engagement can cover a wide variety. I know the Arts Council is very clear in the fact that they're not at any level advising arts organisations to create art content that carries a message about climate change. That's not their role. They don't dictate in any way. But it also must be said that there are artists, particularly maybe in the visual arts, who already are addressing, climate change as part of their work. So, but in addition to that, then arts organisations might talk about how they're working, that they're working in a greener way, and if they communicate this. So there's engaging, and you can engage with the public on a variety of levels.
Yeah, and I suppose that engagement, yeah, Katrina, in terms of how you're reducing your emissions and that communications piece as well, where they're both so important.
Sure.
So
does anybody want to share anything on that? Any thoughts? Feel free. It seems to work best via the chat, but if you want to put your hand up.
But I think a strong response there in terms of that you need both, and certainly in the in-person sessions, this would mirror, I suppose, the sentiment of a lot of organisations, that they felt, you do need both public engagement and, of course, reducing the impacts also. So very much kind of reflecting what we had in the in-person sessions. And there's a few comments in the chat. So Rona, public engagement needs to come first in order to inform reduced impact. And organisations need to be seen to be exemplars of good behaviour. Yeah,
it's all very true.
Yeah.
And I suppose that, in a sense, that's what the Arts Council is doing with its own operations at the moment, is putting a lot of effort into that. And I know a huge amount of arts organisations around the country have done great work.
Yeah.
So
good. And then Elena, one more comment before we move on. So some organisations will be able to make more impacts by influencing, given their carbon footprint and other impacts are low. It has to be a combination. And Jonathan, public engagement is key. Here is a recent radio series that we did that looks at the impact of the climate emergency on composers' work. Fantastic. And we will be saving all of the comments and the chat and links and resources. So it's great to I suppose, see these comments coming in and examples as well. And I suppose this is part of the best practice and the sharing, which is, so useful for organisations. Lucy, yes, the arts for me describe the issue, but they do not actually deliver the solutions, as they are not out there building renewable energy solutions. So the arts can tell the story and communicate the message.
I think that's actually a very good point, and something I suppose I didn't mention earlier is and it's a good and bad news story for the arts sector. The great news is we are not the largest emitters as a sector. And the bad news is that strategically we're lower down on the priority list, but that there is definitely a role there for the arts to inspire and be that kind of transformative change as well. And I think, Katrina, you mentioned this before, it's also, sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be through your programming. It can be just by sharing your impacts. And again, we won't be dictating the programming of organizations.
Yeah, so some great comments there. So we have one final question, and I suppose this is thinking about where you are, your organization, on your environmental journey. So if you feel you haven't started yet, but that you're, I suppose, getting started, you go to the left, and then we have the first steps, demonstrating good practice, and then leading the way. So I suppose this is where you feel your organization is at the moment. And again, I suppose seeing what's emerging there is reflecting what we saw in the in-person sessions. And I suppose this was a great chance as well for people in the room to really see that, you know, they're not on their own in terms of where they are on their journey. And I think that's important as well for organizations to see this, you know, that, okay, so for example, nobody here thinks they're leading the way. So it's how that peer-to-peer sharing and how we're all on the first steps or demonstrating good practice, or some haven't started yet. And if anyone wants to comment as well on this, please feel free to put any comments in the chat as well. So the majority of you there are taking first steps. So hopefully we'll be taking those steps with you. So that's great. I think it's a reflective piece as well, you know, to kind of think, oh, where are we as an organization? But what also came out of the in-person sessions was that when we got talking about this, you know, organizations would say, well, we're doing this and you know, we're doing that and other pieces. And then they realize, well, we're actually doing a lot that we don't acknowledge that we're doing as well. So sometimes it's a nice reflection piece as well. And I think we're going to stay in Mentimeter for the next section. So we apologize now for all of the Mentimeter, but I suppose it's just to get us thinking and to really look at I suppose, getting feedback from you. So we'll have a number of questions that we'll go through. And I suppose like a lot of this is taken from the feedback from the in-person sessions also. So in terms of, I suppose, getting the organizations to reflect on these number of questions and these options that we give, they were actually, I suppose, the top feedback that we got from the in-person sessions.
Yeah, because we got a huge, when we did this in person, we got, you know, maybe up to 80 or 90 different suggestions, but the ones that were the most popular are the first 12 that we're presenting to you, because we reckon they would probably come up. But then there's also an opportunity to just voice your own thoughts outside of these 12 suggestions. So these aren't our suggestions as such. These are the actions that came back from those 90-something organizations that we spent time with over the last few weeks. That's great. There's a lot being done.
Yeah.
And this is great because we can save all this information. This actually does, because we've analyzed all of the information we collected in the in-person sessions. We can add this to it. So it's really a really useful way of feeding back your thoughts and what you're doing into the training and back to the Arts Council.
I think sometimes from doing this exercise, as I was saying earlier, that organizations they start to appreciate that, oh, we're actually doing more than we thought we were doing. And I think that really is the case when you speak to organizations, that there really is that will to do this, and they're doing a lot already.
Going to move on to the second half of the 12th.
Great.
Thank you, Bracken.
So this is just another 6 actions that came up frequently with the groups that we met with. So online meetings, a bit like we're doing today, definitely it does dramatically decrease the emissions that would be associated with a lot of people traveling. There are some do's and don'ts, I suppose, and one of the things that is now recommended is that if you're at a very large meeting and it's not necessary to have your camera on, at least these are rather cold atmosphere, I think, but you can see the logic behind that. If your screen is off, you're using a lot less energy, but then maybe you feel less engaged. So, and there are even good, bad, and indifferent. Apparently, using Teams has a bigger footprint than using Zoom, for example. And I'm not sure why, but so digital is one of the whole impacts of our digital life, is something we're going to look at later on.
Yeah, and even the changed behavior, re-energy use. There was a lot of examples from the in-person sessions as to what organizations were doing, and that came up as I suppose a common area in terms of organizations taking action. And even in shared buildings, you know, they were making an effort to change the behavior.
And it's lovely to see that there are people creating biodiversity areas. You know, even we were one of the Dublin sessions, we were all running the Arc, which is bang in the middle of Temple Bar, very built up area. And yet they had the most beautiful biodiversity area outside, and a kind of balcony outside the room that we were working in. It was really lovely. And we saw butterflies and birds, and so it was fantastic to see. Yeah,
that's great to see. And then I suppose in terms of any additional actions which weren't listed that your organization has taken, this is an opportunity to, I suppose, enter in any of these actions. Sustainable art materials.
Absolutely, yeah. And Noel Kelly did a presentation from VAI at one of the sessions in Dublin. So I know that's a big issue for a lot of visual artists, sustainable art materials, and there's some really interesting work being done there.
Yeah.
Great. Building. Yeah, remote working, definitely.
Very good.
Yeah, so often asking a supplier how green their business is, or how green it actually can be very motivating for them. And if enough people ask those questions, it can lead to real change.
And there is a comment from Marie Louise. It would be great to get a list of suppliers for sustainable art materials. Yeah, that comes up quite a lot in terms of, I suppose, organizations doing so much. But, you know, you don't want to, I suppose, be reinventing the wheel all the time. If there is a list of suppliers, or who's out there, or, you know, just learning from each other in terms of who those suppliers are. Lucy, I agree. Yeah, I agree. The artists have the ideas and the vision and ethos to deliver. The difficulty is finding appropriate budgets to support them and facilitate this work, which often requires more time. And then Brenda, I would add that the arts can communicate if embedded in an existing or embedded in artist practice and research. I think there's a lot of confusion between promotion of climate action and artist practice, given the two meet, but not always the way. So thank you for all the comments. It's nice because, you know, with that in-person piece, you can have the discussion. So it's great to see an active chat there with lots of comments. And lots of individual actions organisations are taking as well.
Great.
Brilliant. That's
We can
fantastic.
save all that. Brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that.
And the Albert, which is obviously very relevant for filmmaking, so that's great. It's true
Yeah.
that the film industry has really done a lot. They're very far ahead in terms of measuring, very detailed measurement of what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and keeping staff
That's
informed.
great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, we might move on to the next one. We're all going to have a break after a 5-minute break after this, so you'll be glad to hear. Does somebody want to explain, Albert? I don't know the exact definition, but it is it's like a way of it's a sort of
Like
a
a measurement
commitment
tool.
to measurement for the film industry. But is anybody here from the film industry who put that in? Would you like to?
You can
Film's not my
unmute.
area now, so I'm not. Who maybe whoever put that in might explain the Albert. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never used it, but I know that colleagues have.
Yes.
And it's been positive. So actions would you like your organization? What actions would your organization like to take? Yeah, public transport always came up. It was one of the top in terms of having better infrastructure in public transport.
Yeah, again, so there are 2 slides covering, 11 to 12 different actions that organizations. Thank you very much, Gerda. That's great. We are Albert, yeah. That organizations would like to take. So we've included those first 12 just for ease, and then there'll be an opportunity to say whatever you would like in the 3rd slide. So public transport definitely was something that came up, and I'm a bit of a champion of public transport. So I do say to people that there have been big improvements. I live out in West Kerry near Dingle, and in terms of things like the local link service, which has just improved dramatically. I know it's still not perfect, but maybe if you haven't looked at it recently, maybe just to investigate what your local link service is if you're outside of the Dublin area. There's definitely been some improvement, but a lot more to be done, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot. I know quite a lot of this is around buildings, but there were quite a few building-based people. Upgrading heating systems, improved building insulation, LED stage lighting, insulation and so on. Yeah, great.
I'm going to show the second half now.
Yeah,
thank you, Bertrand.
Sorry, you'd be well weary of Mentimeter by the time we're done, but this is the price you pay for the online session. So a couple of other options there. Dublin triple glazing was something that came up. Retrofitting buildings, employing a sustainability lead, moving to slow travel, and supporting members. That again, membership organisations, that would be like with artists, with performers, like Lucy and the Isaacs would be a good example. VAI would be another example. So we're conscious that some of these are not as relevant for resource organisations where you're in a small, maybe for an office or a production company where you're in a small office for a lot of the year, and they're like festivals and production companies, so you suddenly have a bigger impact when you start moving. So, it's for those who can't control their buildings, the idea of PV panels and insulation is obviously not where you're at, but we're very mindful of that as well.
Very good.
Great. So there's obviously a lot of interest in supporting members. So it's not just an organisation, it's how you engage with and disseminate information to all the artists and stakeholders that you work with. So obviously that's very important.
Yeah, and a comment from Tony, the complex issues for us as our building is a historic structure and a national monument, and that comes up a lot with heritage buildings, and I suppose the restrictions there in terms of what you can do with buildings. So we hear that a lot.
Definitely, yeah. I know Tony's in the Triskel. So yeah, heritage buildings was definitely, and I think it's going to come up in the list of obstacles. One of the big ones was, and there is a certain amount that can be done. but obviously there definitely are limitations. Yeah, Joan as well.
Yeah,
Yes,
there's a
yeah,
few.
definitely.
Yeah, we actually collected some data on this as part of our nighttime economy survey, and it's nearly 50% are in old buildings, and we're talking, you know, 1800s.
Sure.
So it's definitely going to be one of the main challenges as well, and particularly because the Arts Council doesn't provide capital funding, so it's something that we will have to work in partnership on.
Yeah, and it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of that policy framework document when it comes out from the department next month. So that'll be very interesting. Yeah.
Very good.
Okay.
We have.
So this is just if anything wasn't covered, if there's any other ideas that you have, and we just give this a minute really just to see if there was something that you had in mind but it wasn't covered in those previous two slides.
Ways to recycle and repurpose and share set and costume materials. Yes, sharing resources.
Yes, and particularly the whole idea of storing sets and costumes and how that can be done. That was an issue that came up a lot. In order that they can be reused or repurposed.
Thank you, Lucy, for your comment on the shared building and what's within and what's not within your control. I suppose we did cover a lot of actions in the last two slides also.
We did.
Yeah.
So we want to give you a break. So we might go very quickly to the next couple, maybe Brecon, because we're conscious that people do need a break. So there's just two remaining questions. Noreen, do you want to explain this one maybe?
Yes, yeah. So these would be the obstacles to your organisation to act on climate change. So I suppose, some of these were mentioned already, but in terms of, is it down to insufficient funding? Is it staff resourcing? Not having a designated staff member in terms of acting on this, like a dedicated sustainability person, insufficient time and resources. If you don't own your building, and we saw that in the chat there, that's a serious obstacle for some impact areas. And then again, shared building with limited control. So there's a lot of responses there in terms of the obstacles. So
and in fairness, a lot of people could tick all those boxes.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we have additional obstacles here that, again, this is all feedback from the in-person sessions. The skills and knowledge gap in terms of we don't have the skills or knowledge, limited staff engagement, insufficient time and resources, the heritage building, which we just had feedback on, poor public transport in terms of the limitations there with audience travel or staff and business travel, or the sense of overwhelm. And I suppose sessions like this, we hope that will reduce the sense of overwhelm in terms of that knowledge sharing and connecting with peers, and I suppose that sense that we're not in this alone. And then additional obstacles that might not have been listed that your organisation faces. Gives that a little bit of time. The landlord,
that did come up quite a bit as well. Yeah. Yes, in terms of in terms of transport and international touring and bringing international artists to Ireland. Yeah, there's always that obstacle of how to get them here. That slow travel is a huge challenge. Yeah, and I think in terms of the government funding, one issue that came up a lot is even if there is funding available, it's always match funding. And how do arts organisations find the other part of that match funding, and how do they cash flow it? So it's not, even if the capital funding is there, and again, we're hoping something will come out of that new framework document, it's not always straightforward to access it. And then even managing a project like that, if you're somebody who's running a building, that's an additional responsibility, workload associated with it.
Yeah. And the last question is the kinds of supports that would be most useful to your organisation to address climate change. So we've looked at the obstacles, and now what supports would overcome those obstacles. So we have designated funding, designated staff, online training, in-person training, peer-to-peer learning, and mentoring. And you can rank these, I believe.
Yes, I think that's the idea. You rank those.
Yeah.
And again, these were all the top suggestions that came back from the in-person sessions around the country consistently. So that's why we're offering those to you rather than sort of inventing our own hierarchy.
Yeah.
And so the difficulty is that, you know, where one organisation might want personal in-person training, another organisation might feel, well, no, we really need that kind of online training because we don't have, you know, staff all work remotely and work at different times. It's not easy to organise to get people together. So it does vary a lot. Peer-to-peer came back a lot because there were a lot of, especially large buildings. So whether you're a large studio or a large gallery or a large theatre, there are a lot of shared concerns around energy usage. So we thought there's great merit to bringing those people together. They can learn a lot. A lot of quite a lot of people had undertaken energy audits, so they had that useful information.
Yes, and just responding to your question there, Mary, can you define the resources mentioned earlier that would be provided to organisations to do this work and how these will be allocated? We will be speaking about the draft training plan after the break, just in terms of those supports. And then, Niamh, another issue is sometimes capital repairs are required prior to getting capital funding for climate adaptation measures. For example, leaking roof needs to be fixed prior to installing green roof or solar PV panels. It's effective to do both in tandem with each other, but funding streams can't always accommodate this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No,
Niamh.
it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah. And then we have further supports listed there that would be useful to your organisation. Webinars on specific topics, templates and checklists, 101 guide to climate action in the arts, case studies or short videos. And this is, I suppose our process is ongoing in terms of the feedback from the sector in terms of what these supports should look like. So, you know, we do have a draft training plan, which we'll speak about after the break, but I suppose it's important to get your feedback today as well in terms of what would help for your organisation.
And that was one of the very useful elements coming out of the discovery phase, as well as the in-person sessions, is that we really hope that, having spoken to so many people and heard from so many people, that the training itself will then be hopefully as useful as possible. So all of this input from all of you does really make a big difference. We really appreciate it. And I think there's just one last slide and then you're free for...
And we'll have a break.
About a 5-minute break then.
Yeah. So I suppose any other suggestions that have not been listed on how
and we
the
can,
support should be delivered.
And we can maybe just leave that there and let people answer that as they have a cup of tea or a comfort break or whatever. So is it 5 minutes we're saying, Noreen?
5 minutes, please. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's now 17 minutes past.
Just gone 18 minutes past. So
gone 18.
So
we'll
just before 25 past. Let's say, will we just say 25 past, maybe, just to be
perfect.
So we'll see you all back at 25 past 11.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a million. Okay, so hopefully everybody's making their way back. We'll be ruthless.
We will.
Maureen.
I think we will. Okay, so I think if everyone is back, and Katrina, can you see I've shared my screen?
Yeah, that's working.
Perfect. So this section, apologies, is, I suppose, an outline of the program that we have developed. to present the training and supports that will be rolled out over the next few months. And again, you know, I suppose the purpose of the previous session was really to get your feedback as well in terms of what supports you would find useful. But it's the moment. There we go. Yes, there we go. So in terms of the supports that we have in place in supporting organisations in creating their environmental policy, we're going to start off with 3 sessions. The first will be where to start in terms of crafting your environmental policy. Another session will follow that in relation to how to engage with your team and wider stakeholders. And then the third session will introduce action planning.
You should all have received an email. Sorry for interrupting you, Norm.
Yeah,
Just think they should have all received an email. If you haven't, let us know, but outlining the dates, because they're coming up in June, the dates for those individual sessions. Apologies, Noreen.
That's right. Thank you, Katrina. It's good to acknowledge that. And if anyone hasn't received an email, let us know. I suppose from action planning, we'll expand on that and deliver 3 sessions, and these will be tailored for organisations. So the first session will be for organisations that are in buildings open to the public. The second session will be based for organisations based in a shared building. And I suppose just to acknowledge that that can apply to organisations because they may be in a building open to the public, but also sharing that building. And then the third action planning session will be for festivals or production companies. There will be a series of sessions on impact areas, and we'll go through those now for you. So Katrina will explain the large building webinar.
Yeah, so again, I'd be familiar with this from Sheen Sathira, but just we're very conscious that the sort of the requirements and the challenges facing large buildings are very, very common, so that it makes sense to bring those organisations together. So there will be one session about sort of large buildings and energy. And then another one, I think, on, you know, for example, if you just, like I think Lucy mentioned earlier on, if you've just got a small office in a larger building, you know, how can you manage energy? How can you monitor it? Is it possible? And so on.
And then we'll follow with a webinar on outdoor energy. And I suppose this will explore the impact of outdoor energy. And that'll be specific to festivals and production companies, but it could also apply to other activities for organisations also. This will impact measurement webinar will follow on from this. And that's really, I suppose, covering how we understand and measure our impact. And that's both environmental in terms of emissions, but then also our social impact. And we'll look at some tools on how to measure impact and explore how we can apply this to different art forms and organisations. We will devote 2 sessions to materials. First, we'll look at materials and procurement and how these relate to festivals and production companies and organisations. And I suppose that's looking at materials used on site and the various types of materials. And the second session on materials will look at materials and procurement, I suppose in terms of the non-festivals and production aspect. And that can be green procurement around brochures, leaflets, etc. So it's really just to ensure that this is relevant for all organisations. And for travel and transport, this is a key impact area for most organisations. As we've seen, it does present a challenge if inadequate public transport is in place, but we'll also explore travel in terms of business travel and commuting travel for this session. And then we'll dedicate a separate session to audience travel. And I suppose that's a very difficult impact area to measure and take action on also. And that does require that collective action, but we'll explore what that means to organisations.
And maybe just to say, you know, we're not responsible for audience travel in one sense. It's not something that you're expected to measure, but we're acknowledging the fact that we have a great influence over it. So what can we do about that? But nobody's going to say that you don't pay for it. It's not within your scope, if you like. But how can we influence change there? And then nature and biodiversity, again, we mentioned earlier on about that whole biodiversity crisis that's running parallel with our climate emergency. So that's something that we're going to try and feed through a lot of what we do. And then I think climate adaptation is the next slide. Again, an issue that really we're very behind in Ireland when it comes to climate adaptation. And really, if we have a stronger adaptation plan, our understanding for our organisation, it builds resilience into us in terms of our capacity to deal with future events. And then finally, yeah, we were looking at content and programming, that we've kind of touched on that earlier on. But again, we're very conscious what is meant by climate adaptation. So climate adaptation is, I suppose, acknowledging that there are changes that are already baked into the system. So one of those would be increasing storms, higher sea level, and so on. So rather than sort of waiting for those things to impact us, we can predict that those are going to happen. And if we can adapt to that now, we'll be much better, rather than dealing with it as it happens in a sort of crisis situation. There's a really good organisation called Adaptation Scotland. If anybody's interested in climate adaptation, I'd really recommend looking at that. They've got some fantastic resources, but we'll be going into that in a lot more detail. And in terms of content and programming, again, nobody is saying that we're suggesting that artists should create art on the topic of climate change, but we're recognising that that is already happening, and probably particularly with visual artists. But how can you communicate the work that you are doing if a lot of organisations aren't maybe celebrating that enough? So how can you do that in a more efficient, effective way?
Yeah, and then there will be further topics which we haven't dedicated a session to, but will provide information in the form of guides and templates. And these impact areas will cover waste management, water, food and beverage, digital, climate justice, and sponsorship. And the outline for this training format, so we're currently, I suppose, completing our workshops, and we conducted the in-person workshops, and this is our final online session. And then starting from June, as Katrina said, you'll all have received, hopefully, an email with the dates set out for these sessions. And I suppose as these are happening, we'll be building on that Climate Action Guide 101 for the sector. You know, we're starting now, but as each session happens, we'll be adding to that. So I suppose from now until October, we'll have those online workshops and webinars. These will be recorded and hosted online for further reference, you know, taking into account that people are busy over the summer. So they'll be available for you when required. And then in October, we'll have facilitated roundtables and one-to-one sessions. So that's the outline of the training format, and I suppose what's planned for the next few months.
And we will be, you know, if anybody wants to stay on after 12 o'clock, we're happy. And actually, we're not going to do the extra few questions.
No.
I think we've asked people enough Mentimeter questions,
yes,
for today. I think we've moved on to the final part, have we, Noreen, which is the case study. So and practical tips. So we're delighted that we have, I know Helen is there on standby. We're delighted that we have, actually, if you click onto the next slide, no, it just lists the two, or no, it doesn't. Okay, I think we've got a slightly different version. Okay, so we've got Helen Dawson, who is from West Cork Music, and Helen is going to talk to us about the work that she's been doing. So we have about 10 minutes from Helen, and then we're delighted to have Georgina from Galway International Arts Festival afterwards. So Helen presented at our session in Cork, and that's why we nabbed her and said it would be great for her to do it online as well. So welcome to you both. But Helen, if you want to, I think you're co-host, if you want to share your screen,
okay,
we can let you know that it's, because it's very interesting to see how other people are, you know, to get examples from throughout the art sector. So every location that we went to, we had at least one, and usually two people, two organizations talking about the work they've done. Yeah, that's sorry, screen sharing.
Can you all see that? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Hello, everyone. As Katrina said, my name is Helen, and I work for the West Cork Chamber Music Festival, West Cork Music. So we started our green policy back in 2019 to 2020 was when it first began. And it was myself and the artistic director and CEO Frances Humphreys who decided we would do this. It's something we were both very passionate about. And just to give you a sort of a basic overview of how we began and what we then sort of ended up with. we started by deciding to look at the baseline figures for the last live festival that we had done, which was 2019. And from that, we came to various conclusions about what we could and couldn't do. And we obviously, unfortunately, in 2020 and 21 had the lockdowns. So although we began the data collection for carbon emissions and things like that in 2019, there was obviously then a break, so the data resumes in 2022. When we did the preliminary draft, we then did a staff consultation to get their input in what else they wanted to see in a green policy, or their particular insights into areas, because obviously nobody can see the entire picture of what can and can't be done. People with different responsibilities and different areas in a workplace see different things. So we got their input and got their buy-in then into the green policy that we eventually completed, got the board to sign off on. And the main focus of the policy was to look at carbon emissions. So the carbon emissions began with obviously data collection, and there are a number of online carbon emission tools for measuring things like flights, other forms of transport, a guess of emissions on what the different accommodations have. And that let us establish a baseline. And from the baseline, we came up with doing an 8% reduction for 3 years. So our policy has a timeline to it. We decided we'd do a 3-year policy and then reassess after 3 years to see what we might change in the policy, what was working, what wasn't, and also what new targets might be. And I'll come back to that in another slide. But the key areas of our carbon emissions were transport was the big one, then accommodation, and then office emissions was relatively small. The gaps in our emission measuring were in venue emissions, because we don't have our own venue. We use different venues around Bantry. Catering, again, is something that we didn't have the capacity to measure. And then, of course, audience data, because we weren't at that time asking audiences how they got to Bantry, where they were staying, and that sort of thing. And that would be quite a big undertaking, of course. If it's your own artists, your own performers, you can measure this kind of thing if you're the one kind of booking their flights or whatever. But with audience, it's obviously an entirely different process. So this shows you a little of what we do and our activities, and this is from 2019. So this was our baseline. And that year we were doing 3 festivals. So the Chamber Music Festival, which was 10 days, and brings in, we had just under 90 artists coming in for that festival. The Literary Festival, which is 8 days, and the Masters of Tradition, which was 5 days, as well as various other year-round activities, mostly in schools, but also some other like single performance concerts as well. And you can see there on the pie chart that transport was far and away the largest emitter, whereas office emissions were teeny tiny compared to the other areas. And reasonably enough, given the size of it, the Chamber Music Festival was the largest of the festival emitters, and it sort of goes down from there, quite understandably, I think. So then we decided then in our action plan of the policy that transport would be our key target area, because it's the largest emitter, and also because it's something that we maybe had more control over, because it is something that we engage with artists about, how they're going to get here, And so, I mean, the Chamber Music Festival has always had a residency policy for artists. So we don't just fly people in for a single concert. But we became much more strict about the number of days that they would be coming. So we now, we do our best. There's obviously always some exceptions, but we do our best to make sure that artists stay for a minimum of 5 nights and do multiple concerts over the course of the time that they're with us. And also that they use less connecting flights, so that they will do at least, if necessary, do part of the travel by land. Our nearest airport would be Cork Airport. So if there aren't direct flights to Cork, we encourage them to fly into Dublin and take the train or the air coach down or something. And we actually wrote that into artist contracts. So we explained that at the start of the contract that we have this policy, and we encourage artists where possible to adopt this policy. And there was actually huge agreement from many artists. A lot of them, especially who live on the continent, will only travel by train where they can. Obviously, Ireland doesn't have that possibility, but you know, artists based in Amsterdam or Berlin, many of them will only go by train, and they will make an exception sometimes if they want to come to Ireland or maybe go somewhere else. But there was a lot of buy-in from artists. Now, again, obviously, artists are very busy people if they're touring, so sometimes it isn't possible. But and you know, you need to be sort of reasonable, I think, when you're discussing that, if you really want to get an artist over. But you know, it does, I think baking it into the contract is a very good way of highlighting it, and at least drawing their attention to it so that they think about it. One of the reasons that we decided to go for transport as well was that it would be the one that would have the maximum impact. We didn't want a policy that was going to be largely performative, you know, kind of greenwashing things with very small measures, like targeting teeny tiny things in the office, when you could see from the pie chart that office emissions were the smallest aspect of our carbon emissions. And we also, Francis and I were both very keen on not just doing offsetting, because I mean, there's so many sort of issues around offsetting. And I sort of think of carbon offsetting as a bit like the modern day selling of indulgences. It's paying to try and make yourself feel less guilty about carbon emissions. So the transport was the one that would have the most impact. And you can see here what an impact it did have between 2019 and 22. Our target, if you may remember, was 8%. Well, that's considerably more than an 8% drop in the first year that we brought it in. Now, and you can see that it's not a straight line. We went up slightly in 2023, but it's still a great deal more than we sort of expected or hoped for in the first year. I suppose we probably thought it would take longer for people to agree to be able to change their transport habits. But no, we got a huge buy-in in the first year, so it was a very successful drop there. But for the next, so this year, 2024, will be the third and final year of the current policy that we're doing. And so next year we'll have to look again at targets and maybe change some aspects of the action plan. But that's how we've gotten to so far. I mean, I'll just say another small thing about the other aspects of our activities. So for instance, the Literary Festival, which is 8 days, can't adopt the same residency policy that we do at the Chamber Music Festival, because for writers, you know, they're coming in, they're giving a talk about their book or their poetry reading or whatever. But they can't do multiple performances of that, really. You know, it's one performance. Whereas musicians, they can do multiple different concerts, you know. So what the Literary Festival did was they diversified their accommodation, and that brought about a big drop in their carbon emissions. And you can see there's some of the other positive steps that have happened. We've switched to green electricity providers using sustainable merchandise, and we're trying to bring greater awareness to other stakeholders as well. So we do an audience survey, and talking about the green policy is one of the things that we started doing in that survey. Not to try and, I mean, we hope maybe at some point to be able to start collecting audience data on it, but it's also just to bring awareness of it to them, make them think about it. But there are a lot of gaps and barriers, which I have mentioned before, and the slow travel limitations are a major one, of course, because Bantry is a very remote location. Even with, you know, we're still an hour and a half from Cork Airport. We're 5 hours drive from Dublin. It's a long way to come, and that can be very limiting for, again, very busy touring artists who are, you know, need to get on to their next gig. But you know, that's not something we have direct control over. All we can do is try and encourage them to plan more ahead, and hopefully be able to do you know, more sustainable travel if they can, and things like that. But being in a remote area is a huge barrier, not only in terms of transport, but in terms of maybe local suppliers and things like that. Again, there's limited accommodation in Bantry, so we can't just, you know, choose to go for like a green hotel, a fully sustainable hotel, because there isn't one here. You know, that's not something that we have the option of. So there are barriers and gaps, but a lot of positive steps have been taken too. So yeah,
that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think it's at the same time inspiring and maybe a bit terrifying. So you know, it's for many of you, obviously that's a very advanced stage that West Cork Music are at. Helen, if you stop screen sharing, but if you'd like, could you stay with us for a little bit, and then maybe at 12 o'clock, if people have questions, because I'm conscious that you might be the very person that people would have questions for. So if you could hold on with us.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And now we're going to ask Georgina Adzibwa from Galway International Arts Festival. I probably made it right, Hames, of your name, Georgina, apologies. But Georgina doesn't have a fantastic internet connection, so I'm actually going to present her slides, and she's done fantastic work with the Galway International Arts Festival as their sustainability officer. So just a second now, I will aim to share that. Going well. Now, can everybody see that? Georgina, most importantly, can you see it?
Yes, yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Georgina, and I'm from the Galway International Arts Festival. So bear with me, I have a speech impediment. If I stutter along the way, bear with me. So today I'll be walking you through our sustainability overview.
Apologies, no, Georgina, she told me how a special way to do it so that I'm not sort of scrolling, and I'm just going to try and make sure that I'm actually doing that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the session outline for today is as follows. I'll start by explaining to you our sustainability mission, then our environmental initiatives to date, then corporate social responsibility, then our stakeholder engagement strategies. Yeah, so our visions are aimed that we transition to a sustainable future by significantly reducing our carbon footprint through the application of event best practices. So we do have other sub policies under this a big vision. For example, we aim to reduce our energy our footprint really by 60% by the year 2025. So our climate action policy really it's from the year 2022 to the year 2025. So far we do have our baseline carbon footprint that we collected from the year 2022, and we have 4 SDGs that we actually base on. So we have SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy, then SDG 13, climate action, then 14, life below water, and 15, life on land. So these are the SDGs which really resonates with what we do. So our GIF pillars are as follows, with 5 pillars. So we mainly focus on waste management, but with the aim of recovering resources. Then water management and energy management, transport management, then nature and biodiversity. So whenever we'll be looking at our sustainability practices, we'll be focusing on these 5 pillars. Yeah, so to start with, I'll start with the waste management. So we've been actually having a 3 and 4 bin system, as you can see on the photo above. That's the 3 bin system. Then if it's a 4 bin system, there'll be a glass bin by the side. So it depends with the venue, really. Then since the year 2020, we've been also having a deposit return scheme. So we do this deposit return scheme in collaboration with Heineken. So that's the sample of the reusable cup that we use. So we have for different drinks. So just to mention something very important, so most of our pillars, we work hand in hand with our our sponsors and partners. So it's very important that collaborations, they're very important when you are looking into sustainability. So we collaborate the most with Heineken Big Top and University of Galway. So as I'll be explaining some of those initiatives, we'll be working together with NYG and Heineken Big Top. So we also encourage the use of reusable water bottles. Then we have merchandise influence. So we sell our reusable water bottles, and we also sell reusable bags by our merchandise store. We encourage the vendors to use biodegradable serviceware and compostable coffee and water dispenser cups. We also influence the vendors to use Arapet and canned drinks. Then we have a special group of volunteers called the Green Ambassadors. That's a new initiative that we implemented last year. So this is a very special group of volunteers that we work with. So who are these Green Ambassadors? These are green volunteers who are very passionate about sustainability. So they assist the audience by showing them the proper way to dispose of litter. They also direct the audience to the nearest water refilling stations in case some attendees require this, mainly when they are by the University of Galway venue. They also answer the festival attendees' questions about which product goes in which bin. As we have these 3 bins, then some they won't know. So attendees tend to ask, so they'll be around the bin, then they'll just guide them. And they explain to attendees the importance of correctly placing litter in the correct bin when they ask them, not like they just approach anybody. So whenever they get asked, they also direct attendees to reusable cup retaining stations, because some attendees, they won't know, they just throw on the ground. So they'll be there to say, oh, you can put it back and get your deposit back whenever they can. So just to show you our 2022 waste management overview. So we collected like 18.54 tons of waste here. That was a lot. So that was really our first year to introduce the 3 bin system. So we had 56.2% mixed waste. Yeah, that was a lot, yes. But in 2023, we did well. Then recyclables, we collected 31.9%. Then food waste, we collected 9%. Then glass was 2.9%. So just to show you how we're doing waste management wise. That was the first year. Yeah, sorry about the slides. There was a duplication. So water management, water management, we had water refill stations, which are by the University of Galway. So these are the sample refill stations which are there by NYG. Then we increased our Arts Festival water dispensers, like we have even 2. So last year we had 15 of them. We had 15 of them. Then we used water efficient portaloos for toileting. So our waste management partner, Wash Waste, they do have this water efficient bottlers. So we use those. Then we actually encourage the management and anybody, to turn off the taps. So we have like the labels there by the office. Richard, please, turn off the taps after use, just to raise awareness. So that's important to us. So energy management, we monitor we monitor our external stakeholders venue and our venues as well. And we, like last year, we used renewable energy only by the Heineken Big Top, the ones on our blue tent. So we use biodiesel only. And then one of our other venue, which is on Iris Pay, we were connected to the grid. So there is clean energy as well. And then when it comes not to other, stakeholder venues, some of them now, they have solar panels, but some, we keep influencing them because they don't. And the other problem really is, I think it was mentioned by the team, like some of the buildings, they are owned, but not by the city council. So we cannot do much, but we are doing what we can. Then labeling, we have simple labels by the office stating the switch off the lights, and we also have some of the labels on the desktops. Yeah.
So we've only a couple of minutes left, Georgina, and I hate to rush you, so maybe to pick the key points from the next couple of slides, just to.
Okay, that's all right. Then transport management, we encourage the public not to use public transport. Transport, then we also encourage people to walk for active travel and cycle. Next. Then as for nature and biodiversity, we like last year we had a nature themed festival bar. As you can see, the Heineken bar, it was nature themed, and all the furniture which was in there, it was actually made of products which were put into circularity. Then with the plant world food tour, we the one with purple flowers, the ones who know, the one the ice cream venue. Then for our photo booths, we also had a nature themed photo booth. As you can see there, we didn't use more resources. Then we also do venues environmental assessments. Like last year with this interface program, then WordSpace. So we had to hire someone from the Gao City Council and environmental scientists to come and do environmental assessments. So that's what we're doing for nature and biodiversity. Next. Yeah, as for corporate social responsibility, we do have this Elevate program that supports local artists. So that's a bursary that supports local artists. Then like last year, we gave 50 free event tickets to the migrant community. Then our philanthropy, like last year we had 800 t-shirts, because University of Galway rebranded, so they are our volunteer sponsors. So they encourage us to not to throw away those t-shirts. So we had to put them into circularity. So we supply them to a certain charity, and then yeah, that. So next slide. Our stakeholder engagement strategy. So what we do is we communicate, the volunteers on the induction day. Then we have a green team that includes me, and then other three, environmental enthusiasts, which are part of the management. So they, so it's 4 of us. We try to influence the other management and other internal stakeholders as well that we work with. Then with green guides, these are very important. We have for the management, artists, for crews, volunteers, and stakeholders. So we put some, maybe if it's a welcome pack for the artists, we put the green guides just to tell them the guidelines. Then we always have a trader sustainability policy. Then we do persuasive emailing. We send external venues emails just to encourage them to, to engage. Then digital marketing, we send newsletters via LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Then programming, we usually have climate talks or visual arts, which explain, which are related to climate change. Then with the Green Ambassadors, in person and online training modules, sustainability module. So I'm trying to speed up. Next.
Sorry, Georgina. Sorry to put pressure on you.
No, that's all right. Yeah, so that's the sample of the Green Ambassadors sustainability module that we give them. So it really covers, water carbon footprints, energy management, waste, biodiversity, and then a quiz. So for them to qualify, they have to do this module. And then we also have an in-person training just to tell them about their role and everything. So thank you. That's all we have from the
Georgina, thank you so much, and apologies for rushing you there. There's so much information in that. It got such a good reception in Galway. It seemed a pity not to share it with everybody. So thank you.